All right.
I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, folks, we're started at last. Welcome to Lucy and Crystal and Maggie and Hudson for our zero waste presentation. I'll turn it over to Maggie.
Great. Hi, everyone. Know lots of people in this room by now, but for those that don't know me, my name's Maggie Schubert. I am a member of the Ely Climate Group. And I also work for an organization called CURE, which is a rural environmental and climate advocacy organization. And we are also members of the Minnesota Zero Waste Coalition. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to start off speaking and just do a little bit of stage setting, but then I'm really excited to pass it over to Crystal and Lucy, who work with who are two other members of the Zero Waste Coalition. And I will also just say, probably to their chagrin, I think sort of really leaders in the space and are really sort of pushing this really exciting coalition space forward. So I'm really excited to have them here to talk about different aspects of the work that in the zero waste movement and the work that coalition is doing. So yeah, so with that, I guess, well, should I share my screen, Barb? Is that so that people on Zoom can see it, right? Okay. Oh, this is always complicated. Well, I guess can I get it into presentation mode?
You should share a second time, or put it in presentation mode and then share it
Okay.
again.
Stop
yeah,
share.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now you need to access Zoom. What I do is I share the thing, then I turn on presentation mode, and then I reshare.
Okay.
So escape.
Sorry for the technical difficulties, everyone.
Oh, wait, no, you're doing this, right? Let's see. So screen share. There you go, screen share.
Okay.
There's more chairs.
Okay, this seems to be working. Okay. So yeah, so we're going to be talking today, as I just said, about zero waste and the Minnesota Zero Waste Coalition. But I thought what I would start off with was just talking a little bit about the waste issue and the waste crisis in Minnesota and more broadly. And also, you know, since this is the Ely Climate Group, doing a little bit of a focus on why that is a climate issue. So I'm going to try to keep this brief so that I can pass it over to Crystal and Lucy. I feel like I probably don't have to spend a lot of time trying to convince people that we have an issue with waste, that we have too much garbage and waste of various kinds that we're not dealing with properly, and that has all sorts of impacts for the environment, for human health, for our communities, for infrastructure. And as you can see, it's an issue that's not dissipating in spite of sort of the, you know, perhaps narratives out there that we are getting better at dealing with waste and recycling and innovations and things like that. As you can see from this graph from the PCA, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, even as, for instance, recycling rates might be going up, what we are putting into landfills is also still going up. So our issue with waste is just growing. We are producing more of it in the billions of tons, even just within the millions of tons within the state. And that, you know, that is just growing as these numbers indicate. So we're putting over 2 million tons of garbage into landfills every year, and also dealing with it in other very problematic ways, including this little the yellow line, which I won't spend a lot of that time talking about today, which is WTE, stands for waste to energy, which is also garbage burning incinerators. It's actually a big area of work for us at CURE, but I will not spend that much time talking about it today. A presentation for another time, perhaps. So, right, we have a waste issue. I think we all recognize that. Impacts water, land, soil, air when we're burning it, among other things. But it's also a major climate issue for a number of reasons. I'm just going to focus on two of the really big ones. The first is that waste is a major climate pollutant in the form of methane that comes from landfills. This is from EPA that says municipal solid waste. That's what MSW is. Produces 14% of our methane emissions in this country. That is probably a very big underestimation. We tend to measure that using models and not actually sort of direct measurement of what is coming out of landfills. So there are projections that we are underestimating that by 2 to 4 times potentially.
Is this one cows?
Does it count as?
Is that
Cows.
cows?
Oh, cows, yes, yeah, it's the CAFOs and other sorts of things, which again, presentation for another time. I could also talk about renewable natural gas, which is also part of the zero waste conversation, but again, we only have so much time. So yeah, these are just, and so the methane that is generated by landfills, it comes predominantly or exclusively from the decomposition of organic waste, so primarily food scraps, so food waste, food that we're throwing away, and other forms of organic waste. But it's something around half of what we send into landfills is actually organic waste. And the other thing to be said about it is tackling this issue is a really effective climate mitigation strategy, because methane is such a strong climate pollutant. I think 80 times more climate polluting than CO2 over a 20-year life cycle. But it also it dissipates really quickly, far more quickly than CO2. So the idea is that if you tackle methane really aggressively, you're really buying us a lot of time to deal with carbon emissions in the right way. Because we could draw you that 80 times climate pollutant, we could really tackle that, and it would give us a little bit of breathing room, pun intended, to really sort of address some of our other really big emissions issues. One of the other major reasons that waste is a climate issue is, of course, plastic, which is a fossil fuel product at the end of the day and produces a ton of emissions at every point in the life cycle, from the extraction of the feedstocks that goes into plastic, the transportation, the refining. If we burn it, which we do in this country and in Minnesota, it is a big carbon emitter there as well. And some of these, we all know that unfortunately, recycling is not actually a great way to deal with plastic. I think there's been a number of studies that demonstrate that over the year, and now it has been getting some headlines. There was another recent report from the Climate Integrity Project, or no, the Climate CCI, I'm forgetting what that is, something with climate and something with integrity, that did a recent report that really demonstrates that, once again, similar to how we're suing the fossil fuel industry in the state for fraud when it comes to lying about climate, there's a lot of evidence and documented evidence that they're also lying about recycling as a way to deal with plastic, as a way to sort of expand the plastic industry, which has, again, all sorts of impacts, local impacts, but also on the environment and on communities that are forced to deal with it disproportionately, a burden on other countries increasingly, but is also a major climate issue. And so finally, the last point I'll make about, the intersection between the waste and the climate crisis is that the drivers of this are more or less the same if we're thinking systemically, which is that in both cases, this is largely an issue of overconsumption, and I won't spend too much time talking about this, but also, overconsumption that is not dispersed evenly. There are people and countries that consume on a per capita basis far more excessively than others, and that has a lot to do with income and wealth, as I think we would all know. And, you know, these issues, you know, our climate emissions in this country are going down a little bit due to various kinds of, again, new technologies and efficiencies and some transitions, but not at the rate that they should. And a lot of that, and that is largely, you know, sort of tied to the fact that we are still using energy and creating products and wasting them at increasing rates.
And fossil fuels continue to be cheap.
Yeah, sure. That, well, yeah. And I mean, I think that's a really important thing to note. I think when we're talking about consumption, certainly it is a personal responsibility issue, especially as Americans, we buy and produce and throw away too much, but also we are embedded in systems that make it really hard to do anything else. And that's because there are people that benefit from our current systems of overconsumption. So that's where sort of the zero waste movement comes in. You know, as I mentioned, we came into this work because of our work opposing incineration, garbage burning, and sort of that method of dealing with waste and sort of, you know, offered as a renewable energy, a way to burning it for energy, which again, a presentation for another time, all sorts of reasons why that is all just deeply untrue and problematic. But it really sort of brought us into this zero waste movement, which is relatively new for me as someone who's been in the climate and environmental space for a long time. And I really love it. And I really loved that, you know, working on this really terrible issue of incineration has brought us into this space, because I think the zero waste movement offers a way forward and helping us think about things differently. And in terms of how, you know, we need to tackle these things at the cultural level, at the systemic level. It is not just about sort of recycling. It is about redesigning systems so that we can all, you know, use less, produce less, waste less, but also do it in, you know, in a way that feels abundant and is not necessarily just about austerity and you know, not having as much stuff, and then that feels really constraining. It is about like, what are the options for thinking about these things differently in a way that really benefits our communities. So with that, I am now hopefully going to be able to let some other really great people speak. I'm going to first pass it over to Crystal Dalenkar, who's with one of my favorite organizations in Minnesota that I love working with, which is the Minnesota Environmental Justice Table. And then Crystal's going to talk a little bit more, I think, about sort of zero waste and do a better job of describing what that is, and also what the coalition is about and the work that's doing there. And then Lucy Mullaney from Eureka Recycling, who's with an organization and a business that's doing the work of zero waste. And that's one of the reasons I really love this coalition, because I think it brings me and us at CURE in contact with folks that we don't often, you know, in the sort of, when we're in our regular sort of climate and environmental spaces. So that's one of the reasons I'm so appreciative of this coalition. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And pass it to you, Crystal. And please feel free to introduce yourself however you would like. And you should have screen sharing options, but yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Maggie, for the kind words and for inviting us in. We're excited to be in the space and to talk to folks. I think a lot of our work and conversations are typically in the cities. That's where we're based, but the work is supposed to be in the coalition is very much intended to be statewide. So, but yeah, my name's Crystal Dalenkar, and I am an organizer with the Minnesota Environmental Justice Table. My organization works on a campaign to shut down the Herc incinerator downtown that takes care of most of the Hennepin County's trash. We are a member, our organization is a member of the Zero Waste Coalition. I suppose I'll dive a little bit into the coalition. Lucy, is it okay if I steal your slides? Yeah, okay, that's what I assumed. Cool. Sorry, one second, it's not showing the right. Oh, yes, it was. Okay. All right, I think folks can see, right? Yeah, so we are the Zero Waste Coalition. And the coalition is really, it's, I think, comprised currently of almost 16 organizations and also an affiliated community member. So it's certainly not supposed to be a coalition just of organizations. We have big greens, we have grassroots orgs, but we also have a lot of different, some folks too, just from the community who are interested in zero waste, who consider themselves zero wasters, and hoping to expand that. I think a lot of the last year has just been trying to get the coalition launched. And now we're sort of in the building out the infrastructure phase. But still trying to pull members in, because a lot of our theory around building out this coalition is that it should be very much driven by the folks who are on the ground doing the work, and also the people who are most affected by the waste crisis. Where I think, a lot of organizations, a lot of, I mean, certainly the nonprofit sector, but coalitions as well, will typically kind of elevate the folks who have the, as it goes, the time and energy to be driving local work or policy, right? And unfortunately, we typically just don't see the people who are most oppressed from the waste crisis in those arenas. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is, yes, we have a lot of organizations who are funded and, have this time and capacity, but a lot of what we're trying to do is do a lot of outreach work, and bring and have, whatever's moving on the policy end, brought to these spaces, and really kind of, making it accessible, making what's moving on the legislative side of things actually digestible. And so that's just to kind of name overarching why we came about, because I think there's a serious lack of that in a lot of zero waste spaces. It is historically, I think, not just overwhelmingly a white space. Zero waste is a movement in this country, even though technically it's not, right? I think it's if you look at the numbers of who actually creates the least amount of waste, it is marginalized communities. It's Black, brown, and low income people. And yet they're not the ones that are really highlighted when you think of zero waste or environmentalism. I think that's starting to shift, luckily. But yeah, especially on the policy end, right? And so that's a lot of what we're trying to do in the Twin Cities and in the state at large, is really bring these groups in, and have both people who are, policy wonks in the same room with folks who aren't, and but who understand that we have a waste crisis, and want to create and minimize as much waste as possible. And the ones who are actually doing that work, driving it on that legislation. So yeah, moving down a little bit, as Maggie kind of explained, what is zero waste? Zero waste is a movement to dismantle the systems that perpetuate our throwaway culture, right? A lot of this is about a culture that a lot of us that were born into, and a lot of us have, are partake in, but also that is kind of inescapable. A lot of times when we talk about waste issues and consumerism and hyper extraction and production, a lot of that goes in sort of this onus of the individual responsibility, right? Are you recycling? Are you composting? Whereas at the end of the day, we're not going to recycle and compost our way out of this. We have to make a culture change, because we live in a throwaway culture, right? And that comes from the systems end of things. That's really where the problem lies, is the systems. So yeah, dismantling the systems that perpetuate our throwaway culture, extracting resources, excessive production and consumption, and discarding trash to be burned and buried in overburdened communities. Maggie also spoke a little bit to this, but there's, I don't know that you mentioned, but there's something called waste colonialism, right? And that's what we were hearing a little bit about, where the end of life of all the things we get to enjoy and have most of the time temporarily, then gets discarded in poor communities, both within this country and outside, heavily into the global south, right? And that's waste colonialism. So yeah, a zero waste future means that we are reducing waste at the source, redesigning systems to support reuse, conserving resources, and promoting sustainability within our communities. Yeah, obviously transitioning to zero waste is not going to happen overnight, and it's going to require significant sustained investments in proven solutions and engagement across our community. So another major thing we advocate for is being against false solutions, right? A lot of times you'll find the incinerator is an obvious and major example of that, of false solutions to the waste crisis. And a lot of this is also perpetuated and propagandized by the industry, by producers, by the folks who want to continue on as the status quo, where certain folks are really benefiting and, you know, to a gluttonous degree from production and hyperconsumerism, while, you know, others never get to reap any benefits of that. And so we're also very much, you know, play defense, where we have to keep an eye on industry, because a lot of times they come up with all these, you know, magical technocratic solutions to issues. And of course, policymakers and folks want to buy into that, because, hey, then I get to continue, you know, the same behaviors, and we get to, you know, keep moving in this quote unquote economic growth culture that is in fact not for most people, and not have to worry about anything. And most of the time, these solutions just are not solutions, right? So yeah, who we are, our movement centers the voices and experiences of frontline communities, like I mentioned, who are most negatively and directly impacted by the extraction of resources, production of goods, and disposable waste. With equitable zero waste solutions, more people will have access to clean air, fresh water, green jobs, and healthier neighborhoods. What we stand for. So these kind of are three main components of our coalition. One being environmental justice. We prioritize environmental justice and center EJ principles. I can put a link as soon as I stop sharing my screen about those EJ principles, so folks can take a look at that. That was created in the 90s from a global standpoint of folks most affected by environmental justice. Center EJ principles in our engagement, outreach, policy advocacy, and program development. An inclusive movement. Everyone has a role to play in reducing waste and reaching zero waste. Organizations and individuals supporting our waste reduction goals, protecting precious resources, and advocating for environmental justice are welcome to join the movement. So we really are a very open coalition. We encourage and want everyone and anyone to join. As I said, we are building the bike as we ride it. You know, we are new. We're building that infrastructure. We want the feedback. We want input. We want it to be a collective, very much a collective, and waste-free world. We are committed to collectively advocating for policies. Right at the end of the day, this is the heart of it. Committed to collectively advocating for policies and community programs that drive us toward a healthy, just, and waste-free world. So the hierarchy that is also kind of the crux of everything I'm speaking to show folks, this is the one on the left is kind of our guiding, our North Star as far as the waste hierarchy. So this is actually created by Zero Waste International Alliance. And this is the one that kind of guides our work and guides our policy and a lot of what we have alignment on. So as much as everyone is obviously invited, like as we've been emphasizing, there's also certain principles and things we're rooted in that we kind of need everybody on board who are going to be part of the coalition to be on the same page about. This is one of those things. So at the top of this hierarchy, as you can see, rethink, redesign, reduce, reuse. So a lot of this is the emphasis again on the preventative measures, not just, you know, again, we're not going to composting, recycling are great. We need it. But it's not the solution to the waste issue. their tools, right? And then the bottom half where you're seeing recycling, compost, material recovery, residuals management, unacceptable, that's kind of going down the hierarchy of, when it comes to the waste, what is acceptable, recycling, composting, recovery as best we can. And then again, we're going down into, the management side of things, landfilling, then what's unacceptable, as you can see at the bottom, is incineration. So on the right side is what you see as the EPA's waste management hierarchy, which, as you can kind of see in the fine print, is actually in the process of being reviewed, and that may change soon. So we've seen some things that the EPA has been working on as far as air pollution and whatnot, but as far as the hierarchy, this is currently what they have. And this goes down from source reduction, recycling, energy recovery, treatment and disposal. And then the very bottom is Minnesota's hierarchy, which is based off of the EPA's. And you can see waste to energy, specifically incineration, is in front of landfill. So they, again, the kind of propaganda around this is a solution to waste, or this is better than landfilling, and just under organics. Whereas the hierarchy that we follow, it's an unacceptable, quote unquote solution. It's a non-solution. So, yeah, can certainly answer questions on these at any point. But did want to highlight again, this is, this hierarchy on the left, and a lot of what we stand for is very much on reduction. And the movement we're trying to build is trying to get the emphasis on the way that a lot of folks already manage their trash, but whose voices are rarely heard, bringing them into the space and to the table with people who are making policy and driving policy, who again, a lot of times are unfortunately hand-holding with the industries that are perpetuating some of the most waste, right? So yeah, I'll leave it there and hand it to Lucy on some work that's some tangible work that we're doing at the moment on the legislative end.
Thanks, Crystal. Hi, everyone. I wish I could be there in person, but thanks for having us. My name's Lucy Milani. I'm the Director of Policy with Eureka Recycling. So before I jump into some of our policy work, I just wanted to share a little bit about Eureka. We are a nonprofit social enterprise recycler. We're one of only 4 remaining nonprofit recyclers in the country. Recycling, like back in the day, was like, started at like the neighborhood level, and it's now being really kind of taken over by large companies, most of them which are invested in landfilling and incineration. As a nonprofit recycler, we also have a mission of zero waste. So what that means is we see recycling as a transition strategy to zero waste. We first demonstrate that recycling can and should be done right. So what that looks like is we collect recycling in the Twin Cities area, and then we also sort the recycling that's coming through in our material recovery facility, or our MRF. Our drivers are union drivers, mechanics are union drivers. MRF jobs are one of the most dangerous jobs in the country. And we, unlike most companies, we don't rely on temporary labor. We actually have a lot of longtime employees that helps for safety. We pay well above, living wages, fully benefited, that kind of stuff, showing that you can do this. You don't need to rely on temp. You should be investing in workers and thinking about what labor looks like in the waste world. And then we also really look at making sure, where are we sending? I mean, we're not actually the ones that are doing the recycling. We're sorting the materials, and they all come mixed together, and we're sorting them into 15 different commodities, different types of plastic, glass, cardboard, paper, aluminum, etc. And what we're making sure is that those are sent to responsible end markets. They're not being shipped overseas. We send about 80% of our materials are kept here in Minnesota, and then 95% in the upper Midwest. And then when I talk about, recycling as a transition strategy, there's, as Maggie talked about, like plastic is really, really problematic. It's toxic. There's nothing you can do to make it not toxic. It is like an environmental disaster. But we also recycle 500,000 water bottles at our MRF every day. And we're only one of like about 5 MRFs in the Twin Cities. And the Twin Cities we're only like capturing about like 35% of the water bottles like in the Twin Cities. So the rest of those are being sent to the HERC, where they're burned. And so it's sort of like, okay, what do we do? What do you do in this situation? Obviously, the best thing to do is to stop using plastic water bottles and invest in reuse. Use, your cup. Fill up your water in your cup, things like that, and invest in refill stations in communities. But it's like we need to like change the systems and the structures to get us there. And then we demonstrate that like there's some things that you should like, yes, technically you can recycle anything, right? But recycling is not the solution to most things. And we often like will do demonstrations to show that. So like recently we did a demonstration around plastic film where a company asked us, like, can you show us that like actually you can recycle film in your curbside? And yes, you could technically, if you can capture enough of it, yes, it can technically be recycled, but what's the cost of doing that? It was like astronomical. Are there end markets for it? Not really. What is like the environmental impact of plastic? What are the labor standards related to all of the extraction, production, etc. of plastic? So we look at the can you recycle and then the should we. So I just wanted to lay that out there because there's a lot of like recycling. Oh, we need to recycle. But like as a recycler, this is like kind of the position that we take. So I wanted to just shed a little bit of light on that. And then without further ado, I'll do what Maggie asked me to do. I really went off there. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen. Okay. Let me make this big here. Why can I not? Sorry, one sec. Here we go. Okay. Yeah, okay. So the coalition, yeah, so also I'm a member of the Zero Waste Coalition, which is great. And it's exciting that we're building. And this is, this session, there's been a lot of like momentum for different waste issues. We started off with a number of bills. We're kind of midway through session now. So I wanted to highlight a few that are still moving and then we're still trying to build some support around. So Crystal could actually speak to this better because this is initiative that the EJ table is really leading on with a lot of support from community composters and others. But there's a real effort to prevent organics, food waste from going to landfill or incinerators. There's going to be a couple bills this session related to this. EJ table is leading on a ban. So similar to how we ban yard waste from trash in a lot of communities, this would be banning food waste from going to landfills and incinerators. And then there's also an effort from the NPCA that the coalition is watching and looking at around food waste diversion. So when you look at like the largest contributors to food waste, grocery stores, restaurants, etc., how do they build up systems to divert that from going to the trash? So those, I'm gonna, like when I'm done, Crystal, you might have some more to say on that, but I'm gonna keep going. And then one that is moving is an e-waste collections expansion bill. Electronics make up a smaller percentage of our waste stream, but they contribute considerably to toxics, especially lead pollution. And so this bill would make recycling your electronics, which I'm sure a lot of you have, like most of us have electronics we don't know what to do with, that we're not using anymore. So it makes recycling electronics more accessible, free, and producers need to pay into the system to pay for the recycling and the collection of that. And so that bill is moving in both the Senate and the House. I'm gonna but there's a sign on in the chat. I'll just put in there, if you want to join, one of our coalition members, Rika, is leading on that campaign. They've done such an amazing job just bringing support from a lot of different groups and businesses, and it continuing to build support. And so there's a sign-on letter if you wanted to sign on and support or learn more through that link, you can as well. And then there's a small bill that is like it's like, I think could certainly use some more support. But there's an effort to try to remove the preemption that the state put in place in 2017. So the state basically banned local communities from passing plastic bag bans. And so this bill would roll back that preemption, allowing local communities, cities from passing their own local ordinances if they wanted to. The bill hasn't had a hearing yet, and there's a lot of efforts, especially from county commissioners around the state and city elected officials to advocate for this bill, but they're also looking for community voices. And I'll see if I can pull up, I'll put a fact sheet specifically to that bill in the chat, although it's a tiny bill and it does just what I said. And then the one that I can speak a little bit more to, because when Eureka specifically is looking at the waste stream, we're specifically concerned about packaging. Every day we can see the amount of packaging waste that's coming through recycling and know that there's a ton more that's being littered, sent to incinerator, landfilled. There's a lot of problematic and unnecessary packaging. There's a ton of single-use products and packaging, and it's continuing to grow. And so there is a bill called the Packaging Waste and Cost Reduction Act. It's being led by a group of counties, Hennepin County, Ramsey County, and Washington. But what it does is basically create a product stewardship program, or a program where producers, brands that are selling packaging into the state need to pay a fee based on the amount of packaging that they're selling into the state. And the fee also takes into account the type of packaging. So packaging that is, this is a very broad statement, but environmentally worse, has a larger environmental footprint, they would be paid more into it, pay less for reusable packaging. So this bill, I'll put a sign on in there as well. We, while we're not leading on, we are advocating for a strong bill. There is a risk that this bill could get weakened to the point where we're simply shifting the cost of recycling to producers and from cities and counties without driving them toward change. Specifically, reduction is a key one. But there's other types of changes we want to see. We also want to make sure it's not driving them to sort of, if they're paying for the cost of this type of packaging, that means they're paying for the cost of recycling, they're paying for the cost of potentially collecting a portion of compostable packaging. They're paying for reuse, building out reuse systems. We want to make sure that those are, it's not like a race to the bottom, that they are, they're not paying just for the cheapest infrastructure. We want to see good contracts with strong labor agreements, and things like that. So one piece I just wanted to specifically call out is that the bill requires that producers of this type of the covered material, the packaging, they need to all packaging sold into the state under this law would be reusable, recyclable, and compostable. So this piece is important. So like for the coalition, as we engage in this bill, one thing we're looking for is making sure that how we define what is reusable, what is recyclable, what is compostable, and what is like reduced, what does source reduction mean? That's really strong because we want to make sure those definitions are strong if we're holding producers accountable for them. We don't want to say, like, there would be a risk of like, what if we weaken the reusable definition? And then producers could claim that, oh, well, you know, if a, you know, we've seen definitions out there where if a consumer reuses the product on their own, then it's then it is considered reusable. So like if you took a plastic bag and reused it to like pick up your dog stuff, that would be reusable. Or like another example, but that's something that we'd be like keeping an eye on because we want to be driving towards, again, source reduction and actual reuse systems. And then the other piece of the bill that we're concerned about that it could be weakened as it moves forward is these are specific targets that producers need to meet under this law. And so right now it's set out that producers, and sorry, I have the year wrong. That first one should read 2033, sorry. And the second year is 2032. But by 2032, they need to have source reduce the amount of material being sold into the state by 15%. 10% of material needs to be transitioned to reuse or refill systems. 65% of material needs to either be recycled or composted. And then 10% of material sold into state needs to have recycled content. This piece, recycled content, is like, we're particularly looking at as it relates to toxics in packaging. So it doesn't make sense. This is like another place where none of these bills like get us to where we need to like individually. Like if we are recycling, it does not make sense to continue to recycle toxic packaging. We need to get the toxics out of packaging. And there was a toxics in packaging bill that we were hoping would move with this bill, but it's being stalled. And we don't see it moving this session, and I'm happy to talk more about that. But I wanted to call this out because this is just an example of within that bill, what we, as a zero waste advocate, what we would be looking for in that packaging bill. So I think that's all I had. Oh no, we also defend against full solutions. Sorry. And Maggie could talk about this because she brought a full solution to the coalition last week and successfully killed it. But we are often, as I think Crystal and Maggie also mentioned, there's often, I mean, we see this all the time, not just in policy, but there's, how many companies have made like sustainability statements and goals and all the greenwashing they do on their products and and all that. But there's, we're sort of flooded with false solutions. And so we want to see real solutions pass. And so just through the legislative session, but also, we see this at the federal level too, like with the EPA policy and things like that. How are we making sure that greenwashing isn't kind of seeping into this work? I think that's all. Yes. Stop sharing. I think I'll pass it back to Maggie.
Yeah, thank you both so much. We can move on to questions. I hope there are questions. also, you know, Hudson hasn't spoken yet, not true to form usually, but has done a lot of work on this as well, especially, he's been really involved with the e-waste bill, which I think is one of the reasons that we brought this topic to this space, is because I think there was a lot of interest in the e-waste bill. Maria Jensen from RICA, as Lucy mentioned, was up here at Tuesday group in the summer. And I think, yeah, and I sort of just mentioned that because, you know, we haven't really talked about this, and I didn't mention it in my intro, but right, like the importance right now, the zero waste movement, and the coalition, for, you know, in large part for good reason, because this is where a lot of the work is being done, is really based out of sort of the Twin Cities. And it's just really important for folks in rural communities and in greater Minnesota to engage on this, both because, sorry, there's a lot of aligned interest there, but I also think the issues, you know, in terms of how waste impacts us outside of urban centers, and also sort of our access to infrastructure, some of the ways that we deal with that is going to be different, and the burdens are a little bit different. And so it's really important that we be, sorry, engaged in the conversation. So which is why I was really excited to sort of, you know, bring the coalition and the coalition's work here, in the hopes that we can, you know, be talking about it more in Ely, and just generally have more sort of greater, quote unquote, greater Minnesota voices, in this space. So yeah, so with that, I'll stop talking, because apparently my throat wants me to, and see if there are any questions, either from online or in the room. Yeah.
I don't have a question, I sort of see it. My daughter lives in the Bronx in an apartment, and they collect all of their compost. I don't know where it goes. She doesn't know where it goes. But they do collect the compost. Now, I don't know if it's burned, it could be, but I'm not, and this is city of the Bronx. And so I'm just curious if anybody knows about it.
Crystal, yeah, have you looked into what's going on in New York? Yeah, I'm gonna start with you to see if you have a response to that.
Sure. As far as, yeah, I know that they have a pretty decent organics collection. I'd imagine if there are folks who do know the answer, my intuition would be, certainly probably between anaerobic digestion, bigger facilities that take care of that, anaerobic digesters. That's something that's being proposed right now in Ramsey County, for the cities. And they can be good or bad. It's very dependent on the facility. Obviously, the smaller scale, the better. And usually when it's just dealing with organics and not animal waste and such. And there's also a lot of problems that can happen with that. But with large scale composting, yeah, I think, again, I don't know if other here, but if it's separate to compost, if it's very much a separated compost, I can't imagine that they are burning it or landfilling, because then that they would just have it with regular waste. So yeah, I can look into that. Actually, probably just take a quick Google search here. But yeah.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add to that is, yeah, I agree with Crystal that it's probably not getting burned, although it is worth noting that New York,
It could be dumped, it could be dumped.
yeah, New York, like Minnesota, has a disproportionate amount of garbage burners. But however, they do also have been doing organics, recycling, composting for quite a long time. There's actually a really interesting debate going on in New York in terms of the future of some of that. And so because I think they, you know, like what your daughter has access to in her home is, you know, the apartment equivalent of curbside composting, right?
Yeah.
Which is just like in every individual house. They have, which, you know, is its own way of dealing with it. New York has had a long-standing community composting program, which has also been really successful. And I will call him a problematic mayor, has been looking to roll that back for various reasons in a move towards sort of the more like individual level kinds of recycling. And so long story short, that it's a really interesting debate in terms of like models that are successful, right? And there are different models, and that's sort of one of the reasons, you know, that's talking about New York City, so not directly analogous, but like the models that might work in the Twin Cities might not be exactly the same that works for us here in Ely. But there are solutions, I think, in sort of exploring what those look like. And Hudson can maybe talk about this a little bit because he did go to the meeting in Finland recently because they're having this conversation in Cook and Lake County about sort of what county level composting might look like there. So, which I think is pretty interesting. So, yeah.
I think we had another question.
I got a question. The waste incinerator, the perk, is close to downtown Minneapolis and clearly is in a neighborhood where people are adversely affected by it. The major criticism of that process is because of the stuff that comes out of the chimney, right? Is there a way of cleaning that up? Are they trying to clean it up? Is there any option of succeeding there? Because it sounds so logical and simple to take something you don't want, which has got energy in it, and convert it to energy and use it. And to have to dump it just because it pollutes the air so badly.
I'm just gonna say, I swear Barb was not a plant in asking that question. That was
Yeah.
about the HERC, but I'm gonna pass that to Crystal.
Crystal, while you're unmuting, garbage has a higher carbon content than coal, so you can't clean the carbon content out of burning garbage.
No, I understand that, but what are the toxics that you're concerned about?
I think people are very concerned about the toxics. Crystal, I'll let you talk now.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yes, that's I think a good point to make about the carbon intensity because I think a lot of folks do, and it's very much advertised as a sort of clean energy. And we luckily successfully were able to get their tax credits, their renewable energy tax credits away from them last year because it in fact is not clean. And as was described, it's coal plants actually, it's more carbon intensive than coal plants. It's also very expensive. It is incredibly, incredibly expensive. The HERC incinerator right now is about $37 million in debt. And a lot of that money could go into actual zero waste management and solutions. And so just to name kind of both the expense and that I think it does sound intuitively like burning and the steam that comes from that, you get your electricity and heat, and that sounds like why not, like a great idea. And but unfortunately it's a lot more complicated than that because actually a third of what's getting of what gets burned, a third of that ash from the burning ends up back in landfills, and that ash is highly, highly toxic. A lot of the part called fly ash. So a lot of this ash is obviously on the surface of these landfills, and so it's both flying, it's going into the air, or it is leaching into the soil. And so this ash is actually, if you think about it, it is actually condensing a lot of toxins after the burning process. So you kind of also have to wonder, well, at what cost are we getting this electricity when we have such a toxic aftermath? And that's just the ash, right? Actually, when we're talking about the emissions, to answer your question, there are in fact scrubbers and filtration systems, just like with many industry facilities at that scale. However, the emissions that they have to meet, the emission standards for the MPCA and the EPA, well, for one, those standards are pretty lackluster. A lot of scientists internationally will tell you a lot of what they have as your minimum threshold to be counted as negligible effects should actually be much, much lower, almost by like a half. So a lot of scientists agree on that. So you kind of are so just to name that off the bat, we're working with subpar standards. And in addition to that, those standards do not include cumulative impacts. So how folks are experiencing the incinerator is unfortunately not in isolation. Right, it's in a place that is considered a sacrifice zone because there's a shingles factory. There's all sorts of toxic facilities in a 2-mile radius. Never mind, it's also literally right next to, I mean, meters away from one of our major highways, 94. So there's the highway pollution there, major roadways, Olson Memorial, toxic facilities, and that is what folks are experiencing when they're breathing that air. It's not just, these emissions that, yes, they meet the MPCA standard and EPA standards, but that's not what people are experiencing. People are experiencing the accumulation of all of these toxins together. And that's, it's kind of silly that our policy isn't centering that experience, because that's the lived experience of everyone. And so yes, there are scrubbers and filtration systems, but those standards, with more and more research and studies, especially around particulate matter. I don't know if folks here are familiar with particulate matter 2.5. That stuff is the research that's coming out around that, and that comes mostly from burning. That threshold really needs to be lowered because kids are getting, lung cancer is getting tied to that, all sorts of carcinogenics. And so with all these toxins that we're also learning more about, there's also so much we don't know, right? We're with our very modernization culture and technology, there's so many new kinds of materials that we're throwing away and burning that we also don't know what's going to come of that, right? And so there's also we're playing kind of a Russian roulette with that as well.
So my feeling from what I've heard from you and from Hudson is that the image I should have in my head for this garbage burner is to replace it with a coal power plant.
That would be less harmful.
That would be less harmful.
It would be less harmful.
I mean, in terms of emission and in terms of waste, because coal waste is a terrible thing too.
Coal waste is a horrible thing, but when you're comparing it to trash burners, they're about as bad as it gets.
So what are they
I
actually
mean,
burning? They must be
they're
burning a lot
burning-
of plastic.
They're burning couches, they're burning like a lot of things get sorted out, but like, importantly, I would say that, like chlorine is not fun to eat, but when you burn chlorine, it becomes dioxins. And I think we've all heard a little bit about dioxins, and they can get scrubbed. You can scrub out 99% of the dioxins, but as Crystal was saying, they don't go away when you scrub them. They go into one of 10 landfills we have. And some people in these communities have seen the ash fall off the truck. It's not always the case that it's disposed of. Even if it's disposed of perfectly, it's still in a landfill in the state of Minnesota, leaching into something else eventually. But there have been many facilities, there have been anecdotal examples at least of facilities where they just let the ashes dump off the truck. It's happened in Los Angeles. I believe it happened in Maryland. And so, it's not that waste that's unburned is pure as the driven snow, but burning it creates new problems that are really, really pernicious. And I would say that for those of us who care about PFAS, all these garbage burners do is volatilize PFAS into the air, and it rains down for hundreds of kilometers on the people around there. And we wonder why we all have PFAS in our bloods, and there's more and more consumer products every day that have PFAS in them. And just indiscriminately burning them is not the solution for that.
They don't burn. They
Yeah.
just- Yeah,
They just move around.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you're not burning banana peels, you're burning coaches.
They're trying to not burn they're trying to get the banana peels out of the system. But I mean, do you know, Crystal, how much of the HERC is burning organic waste or things that could have been composted?
Yeah, so that's the other thing. It's about a third. So a fourth or is recyclable, and then the other one is organics. So that's the other thing, is it's not necessarily, certainly for the little bit, for some of the electricity and heat, needs to be replacement. But again, as is being described, the HERC is not the solution for creating that energy. But as far as the waste problem, what landfill does with plastics shouldn't even, it's not even in the same category, pales in comparison to what burning plastics does, right? And burning metals. A lot of this stuff, yeah, landfills are not great. We're certainly not proponents of landfills, but if you get a lot of what is wrong with landfills is the methane that comes from organics. So if you divert the organics out of that, yeah, you have the landfills that, as we're trying to achieve zero waste, will be holding plastics and electronics, but at least that is sitting there versus, and when you're actually having landfills that meet certain standards, environmental justice standards, that pales into comparison to what the incinerator is doing, which is actively burning plastic, which is creating, as was mentioned, dioxins, some of the worst toxins known to man, dioxins, particulate matter, furans, all of these, and PFAS. And yeah, most incinerators do not burn at the level that, this is also not actually known, but they believe you could, at a certain temperature, destroy PFAS, but none of these trash burners are burning at that level. So they're actually just spreading PFAS into the air.
Wow, on this happy note, maybe we should,
Yeah, oh yeah, we are at
Any
5:05,
quick-
yeah.
Any quick questions? So let's thank,
Thank you.
everybody.
Yeah, and I think Lucy shared a bunch of links in the chat, so we will collect that. And I think send that in an email, because as you know, as Lucy was talking about, there's a lot happening at the legislature to like help deal with this issue and like, you know, take the electronics waste, reduce the plastics, reduce the packaging. And so, yeah, there's that could use support, including often not entirely, but sometimes, you know, our legislators up here are the ones that could be pushed on some of this stuff. I'll leave it vague. for the
Thanks,
sake of
thanks,
recording. But
Crystal,
yeah.
thanks, Lucy.
Yeah, thank you
thanks,
guys so much for coming, and yeah, I'll talk to you soon. Yeah.
Hudson.
Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
All I can apologize to all you young people.
Oh,
And I want to know, I use the same water bottle over and over and
Yeah.
over.